Hello. This is Tales of Dread. We have some scary stories about Bigfoot for you to hear tonight. So, stick around and enjoy if you like cryptid stories. Watch out for what lurks beneath, and don't forget to like the video. Before I start, I want to say that I'm not sure what I saw that day. I don't usually believe in Bigfoot and other such things, but this day has me wondering. I went camping by myself in California's northern wilderness area. I live about an hour south of Los Angeles. When I have the time, I sometimes go places by myself. About 3 hours away from home was where I decided to camp. I decided to go on a weekend, when the weather was mild and cloudy, which I thought was perfect for camping. On the first day of my trip, I set up camp around 4 or 5 in the evening. Things didn't get really interesting until about 9 p.m. that night. My campsite was in the woods, and behind where I set up my tent and made camp is a ridge that runs north to south. From this ridge to where I made my small fire is about 500 feet. I was surrounded by trees, so I could hide from anything in the forest behind me. As I lay there smoking a joint to pass the time until bed, I heard what sounded like footsteps behind my fire. I looked up and around, but I didn't see anyone or anything that seemed even a little bit strange. The sound went on for about 3 minutes before it stopped, so I decided it must have been an animal of some kind. Just as I was about to go to bed and try to sleep, I heard it again, but this time it was much closer. This time, the sound of the step seemed to come from right behind me. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw the silhouette of a tall person standing there in front of my fire. My first thought was to fight or run away, but when I tried to turn around on my sleeping bag, I couldn't move. The only thing I could do was move my head. The figure stood there for a moment before walking over to the fire and kneeling down in front of it. When I next looked up, I wake up in a hospital bed with a sheet over me. A nurse was there to make sure I was okay. She told me that my vital signs were fine and asked me what was wrong. I told her that all I knew was that I had woken up here, but I couldn't remember how I got here or what happened before that. She seemed worried at first, but as I told her more, she became more interested. I told her I had been camping, and didn't know what was going on. She left the room, and a man who said his name was Dr. Keller came in. He moved the chair to my side of the bed. I told him what I knew. I said the same thing to him. I told the nurse just now. He wasn't dressed like a typical doctor. Instead, he looked like a government worker, with a suit, tie, and glasses. He asked me if anything strange had happened before this happened or if I knew the area where it happened. I told him that there was a ridge behind my camp. As Mr. Keller moved his chair closer to my bedside and leaned in to ask me what else I knew about this ridge, his interest grew. He said he had never heard of anyone going up there and that it was too far away to be worth the hike. I told them I had been hiking and had left my car in a small clearing at the bottom of the hill. There used to be an old road for getting to mines. As I told him more, he got more and more excited and started to tell me more about the history of this whole area. He started by saying that this place used to be a thriving mining town, but it was shut down because people kept going missing and strange paranormal things were happening in the nearby hills. Most notably, people would come out of the forest or hills naked and badly hurt. Some were pretty sick, and they died a few hours after they were brought in for care. They didn't know why or what was going on, but three things seemed to show up in every single report more than once. People were also found to have no prints on them. The second thing was a description of tall, hunched-over people who were seen in different places during all of these disappearances. The third, people thought it was skinwalkers. He went on to say that the Skinwalker Ranch in northern Utah wasn't as busy as it used to be, especially on the hill where I was sleeping that night. But it was said to have an underground shrine of a cult of skinwalkers. Many people thought the hill was the home of a skinwalker cult because many people had gone missing or been attacked near it. As he told me all of this, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked if anyone had ever gotten away from one of these creatures or if anyone had ever seen their shrine before. He went on to tell me that a mother had taken her 3 young boys hiking in this area. No one ever saw them again. This took place at the start of the 1980s. No one thought she had really lost them. They thought it was just an excuse to leave their husband, who was very mean and angry and often beat them up. He told me to think about it and let him know if I thought of anything else. I thought about the possibility that a skinwalker cult was in the area, but I dismissed it right away as a joke or a sick way to get attention at the end of our conversation. This is also when he told me that the military and aliens were working on technology underground right near where I was camping. He said that the person I saw right before I passed out had used some kind of special technology to knock me out. Then, this being supposedly carried me to the side of the road, where someone found me not moving and called an ambulance. Listen, I get it. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with this crazy story. I can't lie about what I've seen and heard. I'm also not doing this to make money, and I want to keep my anonymity. So, here's my story as best I can remember it. Something was out there in those hills, and it wasn't a person. Whether or not you believe me, please be careful if you ever find yourself near these hills. First, a little bit about me. I've worked in law enforcement for more than 15 years. So I know how an animal in the wild acts when it does something strange. About a month ago, I went on a hike near the top of Mount Evans in Clear Creek County, Colorado, which is about 10,400 feet high. As it got darker, I decided to walk back down the trail to my car. As I got to the bottom of the trail, I saw something moving across it. It moved quickly and didn't care about people. I couldn't stop looking at it as it went into some trees on the other side of the trail. It looked like a 2-legged dog, and when it ran, it took very long steps. I could see shoulder blades as it ran. This must have been at least 7 feet tall. I know a lot about the animals around here, and this was nothing like any of them. At least as far as I know, it had been about 40 to 50 years since anyone in Colorado had seen a Bigfoot. But after what I saw, I'm going to start keeping an eye out for it. Now. That's just what I had to say. Some of my good friends have pretty interesting stories of their own. All seen a lot of the same things. In fact, a very close friend of mine and I have known each other for about 12 years. He is a great shot, served in the military for a while, hunts, fishes, and does everything else. He is as country as it gets, and when we were talking about this, he told me about a time when he and his uncle were fishing near the river and he turned around just in time to see a strange-looking animal moving quickly across the trail and into the trees. He said that it was tall, walked on two legs, and wasn't too big. As far as he could tell, it didn't have a tail. His uncle said he was 12, but he is a lot older now, and he still remembers the event like it happened yesterday. One of my co-workers says she saw something that was a little more aggressive than what I saw, but it was still a sighting. One night, she took her dog for a walk behind the local school. There's a pretty big open field there, and from where she was walking, she could see the school. When they got to the middle of the field, she saw what looked like a big man standing right outside the school. She said it looked like a person, but its arms were at its sides and it was standing straight up. As soon as she saw this thing, it took off running across the field towards her. It moved with two legs. When she turned around and ran back home, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She said she could hear the grass and dirt being pushed around as it ran after her, but she lives in a town, so this scared her to death. I'm hoping that maybe some of you have seen or done something similar and can help me understand what's going on here. I'm very interested in this topic, and I want to find out more about what's been going on in my area. We appreciate that you took the time to read this. I know I sound crazy when I write this, but I feel like I need to say this. In 2017, I took a trip back to the Catskills, where I grew up. I decided to hike part of the trail that he used to walk when he was in high school. This trail goes through some woods and up a very steep hill. I can see that it's 2020 now. So, I started the hike around 6 p.m., when the sun had just set. I had my phone with me. About 6:30, I turned on the flashlight app on my phone so I could see as I walked up the hill. So, I wanted to get out of these woods before it got too dark. After that point, it would be safe because there are houses along the trail. I looked down at my phone when I was about halfway up the hill. Also, it was getting dark enough that I could walk through the woods with only the light. Now that the sun has just gone down below the tree line, there are still spots of light coming through the trees. But when I looked up ahead, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. It was right ahead, in the next bright spot. I saw what looked like the legs of a man standing still in the trail. When I say still, I mean that he wasn't moving at all. On its own, That would have been enough for me to leave. But the real reason I left was that when I looked at it more closely, I saw that it was a big dog standing on its back legs. When I looked more closely, I saw that it wasn't even a dog. It looked like a person. I don't think you realize how weird this was. What did I do? Well, I turned off my flashlight app and tried not to draw attention to myself. I started slowly walking back in the direction I had come from and praying to God that I wouldn't make whatever I was thinking about angry. I thought for sure that this was a werewolf. This thing looks over at me all of a sudden, making me even more scared than I was before. Its eyes were like glowing hot coals that were on fire. I screamed, turned around, and ran as fast as I could up the rest of the hill. I went back to my car. I rang 911. When I told them when it happened, they thought I was kidding. Who would call 911 in an emergency? This is a waste of your time and theirs. They asked me questions that showed they were just kidding around and didn't believe anything I said. I was getting more and more angry as time went on. Why don't they believe what I say? I saw that they couldn't help me in any way. I was very scared. It was going to follow me back home. So I packed up my car and drove back home as fast as I could. After I got home, I didn't even get out of the car for about 5 minutes. I just sat there, a nervous wreck, and waited to see if this thing really had followed me home. After that night, I didn't feel right for 2 weeks. I had maybe 3 terrible bouts of anxiety at random times, and I always felt like I was never alone. This upset me so much that it would be too easy to say it was traumatic. I'm going to say it straight out, I saw a window go hands down. I didn't think they were real, but this has shown me that I was wrong. I'll never go up to the mountains alone again, and I'll never camp again. I live in the state of Washington. I've never seen anyone win here. But other people have, and it's usually in the north. Most of the time, we will see them. When me and my friends went camping at the Mystery Ranch site near Mount Baker, we stayed on the grounds. We were drinking around the campfire with some friends who came to visit when I decided to go back to our campsite by myself. I was about 200 yards from where they were shooting. When it happened, I had just stepped over a fallen log in the middle of the forest, where there were no lights and it was completely dark except for the faint moonlight. When I looked up and saw this thing, my first thought was to turn away from it because it looked scary. It had a human torso that was all black, like a shadow. Its arms and legs were very long, but they didn't look right. It also had the head of a deer, with big antlers that went down. It was bent over and looking down at me from up high. As I looked at its face in the dark, I could see that its eyes were glowing yellow. My eyes aren't that good, so I couldn't see much except for those scary antlers and those yellow eyes that seemed to be staring right into my soul. I was so scared that I couldn't stand it, but something told me not to run. I wanted to run as fast as I could back to the fire, but it felt like a strong magnet was pulling me toward this thing. I tried to get away and yell for help. It didn't work at all. It looked up at the sky and held its gaze there for a while, then turned its head toward me and did the same thing again. When I saw that face looking down at me with those yellow eyes, I was frozen with fear. It seemed like forever before it took off running into the night forest, making all kinds of noises as it went through the trees and brush to get away from us. My friends must have heard something, because they came straight to where I was standing, still frozen in fear and shock about what had just happened. They found me just a few minutes after I ran away. When I told them why I was out there, they thought I was joking. I couldn't say anything. They thought I was trying to play a joke on them, but when they heard the same howling that had scared me a few minutes earlier, they knew right away that it wasn't a joke. This isn't the end of my story. My friends told me to go back to camp because if I stayed with them, nothing would happen. They didn't think any of this was real, and if they did, they would have to admit that this thing existed. Needless to say, they didn't even think it was real in their minds. I spent the whole night on the other side of the campsite with no problems at all. I ended up talking to one of the older people, who could tell right away that I was different. He told me I needed to be cleansed and that an evil spirit had left a mark on me. That was the only thing I saw. So to speak, it wasn't there to hurt me. It was there to leave a mark on me so that more bad things could come into my life and ruin it. He told me that's what these things do. He never, ever called this thing a wendigo. This is just a guess on my part. The next day, the medicine man gave me a blessing, and things seem to be going well for now. However, I still have vivid dreams about these creatures. Quite often, in fact for this story, we have to go back to 2015, when we were camping with my grandparents in Connecticut on a family trip. We wanted to do something different than the usual camping trip, so we decided to go into some wooded areas. Imagine how surprised I was when I first saw this thing. Before I saw it, though, things were normal. In June, it was a beautiful day, and we were all very excited about going camping for a long weekend. We drove to the campsite and set up everything there. The situation was good. We started having fun by roasting marshmallows over the fire. The weather was great, and we even saw a deer eat right in front of us. It was amazing. But neither I nor my family could have known what would happen that day. When there were no more s'mores. People were all pretty tired. My grandfather told me to go to bed early because the next day would be full of things to do. I agreed with him right away, and I quickly got into my pajamas. I walked back to the tent where my mother and I would be sleeping. I was very tired, but not so tired that I couldn't stay awake. Even though I was new to the sounds, The little noises you hear in the woods sometimes didn't bother me as much as they should have. I felt safe because my grandparents were close by. The night was quiet on its own. I will never forget how much fun I had there. I fell asleep quickly. The next day was pretty normal until I got up in the afternoon and we drank a lot of coffee and ate a big breakfast of eggs, hash browns, sausage, and bacon wrapped in a burrito cooked over the fire. It was exactly as tasty as you might think. We didn't see many footprints on the first trail we went on, but I did see a big spider about the size of my thumb that wasn't hairy or brown. It was mostly black, but its back had an orange stripe. I stopped for a moment to use my phone to take a picture, and then I went back to the group. We walked down that trail for about 30 minutes before deciding to take a different one. As we were getting ready to go into the woods, we all noticed that there were a lot of broken branches on the trail. We looked at each other, unsure of what could have broken the branches on the trees, which were broken from at least 6 feet up to about 10 feet up. My grandfather took us off the trail and into a small clearing in the trees. As my uncle and I walked through the woods, he saw something on the ground next to a tree. He told my grandfather about it, and my grandfather gave me his canteen so I could look for myself. What I saw really shocked me and made no sense. From what I could tell, it was the head of a deer or what was left of it. The head of the deer had been torn off, and it was just lying on the ground. We all just stood there, shocked. I was about to ask my grandfather what he thought or what he thought might have happened when I saw that the bottom of the tree where the head was resting had been dug up and that there were big claw marks in the dirt around that area. They looked like something with its claws out slid along them, leaving deep grooves in the dirt. My grandfather walked right up to the head, put his hand on it, and told everyone to be quiet. Then he let out a long whistle, which startled me but made sense when I thought about it. He gave us a sign to be quiet. In the quiet of the forest, he had heard something. Nothing was moving. At that moment, we could hear things moving toward us. We all look in the same direction as we can now barely make out a tall, big shape coming toward us. People in the area are superstitious, so they are afraid of it. Our group of 4 had already left before we had much time to look around. But as it got closer, I was able to tell what it was. It walked on 2 thin back legs with black fur that reached to its shoulders. It had a long nose and a mouth that was bigger than usual. It looked like it was full of sharp teeth. I remember more than just that about it. It looked like its eyes were made of glass balls. When I turned around for the last time before heading into the woods, I saw this animal staring at me. What's the next step? I was really scared. I saw that its mouth was moving, like it was trying to say something. It made a sound that echoed through the forest like a grunt, then almost a whimper. Everything went dark, and by the time I came to, we were all in the car. My brother was getting us out of there. He said he thought I had passed out, but I think it might have been because of what I had just seen. When I heard that low grunt from behind me, I thought I was going to pass out. When I woke up, we were in the car and leaving. I do remember that we never went back to that place again. To make a long story short, I own a big piece of woods that goes all the way to the back of our property line. I've spent a lot of time playing in those woods. I love going places. But it wasn't until recently, in September, that I realized they have something very bad inside of them. After dark, I could hear something moving around in there, but I never saw it until recently. I always felt uneasy when I went out there, and one night while I was in bed watching TV, I heard what sounded like a scream outside my house. I ran to the window because it was so loud and saw that it wasn't anything I could see, which goes without saying. I didn't sleep much that night. Let's move on to November 2nd. My boyfriend and I are trying to fall asleep in bed when we both hear a horrible animal sound coming from the same general direction. At this point, I was pretty scared of everything and said screw it twice. Right now, I'm not looking around in the woods to find out what's going on. My mother taught me to be a strong woman, but every woman has her limits. I think I found mine when I heard a scream in the woods that sounded like the first one I ever heard. And not more than 10 minutes later, we hear footsteps running across the deck and out my back door. This time, I knew it was real because I heard it loud enough. My boyfriend and I just looked at each other and grabbed knives or whatever weapons we could find near his house without saying a word. We stood there on the deck and listened for sounds. It was so quiet that you couldn't hear a thing. Even at night, nothing happened. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting for whatever was moving and making those noises to stop, they moved. Instead of going outside half asleep, we decided to go back inside and call 911. When the police showed up, we told them what was going on, and they looked as hard as they could, but to no avail. They told us that the deck was covered with big dog prints, but they couldn't find anything else. Now it's November 6th, and I was sitting on my deck when I heard the loud crashing sounds and screams again. It came from the same place it had come from before. We decided that this time we wouldn't be stuck in our house. So, my boyfriend got about 8 of us together and we all went into the woods to find out what was making all those horrible noises as we walked through. Just a short distance in. From my left, we heard the most horrible growl. When I turn around to see where it came from, I see a big black thing standing on 2 legs and looking right at us. When a light is turned on, we all run away like cockroaches. I don't know what on God's green earth lives in those woods, but I have a feeling it's not there to make friends. Help me? What am I supposed to do? I like going to places where people say they have seen cryptids. You could call me an amateur paranormal researcher. One of these places is a small wooded area here in South Dakota. It is next to a big high school. Almost every story out there about it is similar. From what I've heard, they are made by workers on the nearby highway. But once in a while I can find fresh footprints in the snow. When I go outside to check myself, I believe there is something out there. I was picking up my daughter from work one afternoon, and since her building has a very large parking lot, I decided to use it as a vantage point. As soon as I started reading on my phone, I felt like someone was watching me. I shook my head to get rid of the creepiness. Before I turn around and look out my back window, I look at the trees around me. I was shocked by what I saw. A dark figure was standing near the trees and watching me. When I turned to look at it, it dropped down and went behind another car. When it found out I could see it, it was ugly and reminded me of a pig's face. My heart started to beat like crazy, and I started to breathe faster. I looked around to see if anything else was moving. After I got out of my car, I ran back into the house to wait for my daughter. When I got out of my car and went to the back of it, I finally saw it again. I ran in at that point. Afterwards, it was fast, too fast for a human, but its face and body looked a lot like a man's. The last thing I saw of this person was its dark shape moving across the road in front of me and close to my car at an almost impossible speed before disappearing behind more trees. It scared me so much that I drove home as soon as my daughter was in the car, never wanting to do any more research. Maybe I'll finally get the courage to do it the next time, but I can't promise that. A long time ago, this happened. But after what I went through, I'll never forget it. In the summer of 2012, I was really interested in the paranormal. A group of my friends and I were doing an EVP session pretty far into the woods. After a few hours, as the sun was going down, we started walking back to our cars. When we got out of our cars, we talked about how happy we were to have gotten recordings of ourselves shouting into nothing. We had no idea what was going to happen next. We talked about how excited we were for a minute or two. We think that something started following us from behind the trees, as if it was stalking us there. We all turned around and started walking toward our friend, who was standing right by his car. At that point, we all heard a click. So my friend asked me to describe the sound. I told him that it sounded like a click. My other friends got goosebumps and looked horrified right away. My friend, who had been standing there the whole time, walked over to her. She started shaking very badly and told us that she felt someone or something grab her clothes from behind her, that she felt a dark energy around us, that she no longer felt safe, and that something bad was going to happen later that night. I guess she would eventually see her own death coming. But that's not what's going on right now. She also said that she heard someone whispering in her ear, but she didn't say what they said. She couldn't say it again. To the letter. Then she ran into my friend's car, which was parked next to hers. Now that she was safe, we were all glad. We got in our cars and started driving away from my friend. I was the first one to leave with her mom. We both pulled into the same spot. When we were about 3 blocks away from where everything happened, my friend's mom said she felt like something was sitting on her chest like bricks. She did not know what it was. She was having trouble breathing and was on the verge of passing out. Then, we came up with the idea that it could have been an entity or a spirit guardian who was being forced to want to stay as far away from those woods as possible. So it was using telekinesis or spiritual powers against us. I heard my phone ring just a few seconds after she said this. I looked at my phone when I looked down. It showed some strange symbols next to a number and said unknown number. And just so you know, spam and robocalls weren't nearly as common as they are now, and I hardly ever got calls from unknown numbers in 2012. Too many things happened at the same time. Even though I was scared, I decided to answer. Anyhow, I'm under pressure and I'm interested. I answered and said hi. All I could hear on the other end was a strange mix of static and a muddled voice. It almost seemed evil. I asked who was calling for about 30 seconds before I hung up. I remember thinking that everything was crazy and that no one had ever seen anything like it. Now, my mom was going crazy. I didn't tell her anything because she's already very worried and I didn't want her to worry even more. She still doesn't know that all of this happened the way it did. The next morning, after hearing about what happened, we tried to find out if anyone had seen ghosts or Bigfoot skinwalkers in the area, but all we could find was that a few years ago, a few children went missing or were even found mauled by something that seemed to be around at the same time. I still don't know if this was done by a demon spirit, a dark entity, or maybe even a skinwalker. I'd love to know if there's anyone out there who thinks this event is more than just supernatural, that maybe there's a dark force behind it, because I'm scared to go back. I'm a man who loves to fish, and when I go fishing, I usually look for big ponds or lakes to fish in. My friend and I drove out into the woods and fished all in the same day. We found a small pond, but it wasn't big enough to fish in. So, we kept looking for what we needed. We found a nice lake where we could fish in the end. It was a good size, and it was surrounded by a lot of plants. There aren't many houses around either. It was much more remote, at least 2 miles into the woods, as we walked around the lake's edge looking for the best place to fish. Someone here feels something moving. We both look at each other, thinking that one of us must have stepped on something because the ground started shaking. We looked in the water, but there was nothing there. So, we kept looking for a good place to fish while talking about how strange it was and how we might have felt a small earthquake. As we walked forward on our search, I saw something move near the base of a nearby tree. It moved quickly, but as far as I could tell, it was not a person. It climbed up the side of the tree, and nearly hung by its arms from one of the branches. After seeing this, My friend and I ran back to the car and didn't look back a single time until we were out of there. Since then, I've tried to learn as much as I can and do as much research as I can. I think, or at least think it's possible, that my friend and I saw a young Sasquatch watching us that day. Maybe to find out more. We never got a sense of it. It wasn't mean or aggressive in any way. Like I said, it was just curious, and I think we scared it away. However, I can't even begin to guess what the strange shaking or earthquake-like feeling in the ground was. It makes me think of UFOs, which I'm very interested in because I think aliens are cool and I've seen them all my life. In fact, my earliest memory is very clear and takes place when I was 4 years old and living in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia with a fairly wealthy family. I had left the house to play with a kid who lived about 150 feet up a hill next door. The other kid finally went home to have lunch or something. So, I was outside by myself, playing on a small grassy cliff above our driveway that looked down on some wooded valleys. I was standing there watching some ants when I heard a buzzing sound in the woods behind my house, right below me. After looking around and trying to figure out where it was coming from, I thought it might be something living out there, like a bee's nest. I thought it would be fun to go check it out when I was 4. So I'm running back to my house, jumping over a ditch that separated our property line from the wooded valley. As soon as I got over the ditch, I stopped dead in my tracks and just stared at whatever it was, because you couldn't miss it. It was very big and almost looked like gold and bronze. If I remember right about how tall people are, it might be taller, but not by much. Anyway, as soon as it saw me, I heard my mom calling to me from inside the house to come in and eat. I start yelling back at her and tell her I'll be there right away. I look down the path toward our driveway and wait for her to show up. After a few seconds of staring at where this thing was and not seeing anything, he finally saw it. Or maybe I heard a distant rumble behind me that sounded like a truck was coming down the road next to us, even though we didn't live near any main roads and were in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, after a few seconds of looking back down the road, I hear my mom calling to me again. I'm still just standing there, frozen, watching and listening to what's going on in front of me because I don't know what to do. Then, after a few more seconds, everything disappears all at once. The buzzing is almost too loud to hear. And a second later, a huge golden or bronze rod-shaped thing came out from behind the tree line where this thing was standing and shot straight up into the air at incredible speeds before disappearing. As soon as I come to my senses again, I run as fast as I can toward the house, where I expect my mom to be. But I find her inside instead. Since she had never called me before, I wasn't sure what to do at this point. So I just waited for her to talk while I stood there. After a few moments, she asked me what was wrong. Because she can see how shaken I am. Even though I'm only 4 years old, she seemed to believe me when I told her everything that had happened. I didn't tell her about the buzzing yet because it wasn't that important. She does look confused, and maybe 30 seconds after she walks down to where the sound came from and says, "You're probably seeing people pulled off the road," she comes back and says the same thing. This makes absolutely no sense. We lived so far away from any main road that no one could see us. The sound I heard could have been a smaller helicopter. After that, none of this happened anymore. I thought it might have been a dream, but the more I read and learn, the more I realize it was all too real. Still, I have no idea what happened or how to explain it. So I was just sitting on my back porch smoking a cigar and relaxing when all of a sudden I hear this deep howl that starts near my house and goes to a couple of houses down. It then starts going from backyard to backyard, and the neighbor's dog starts barking like crazy. What if my dogs hear them barking, run up to the fence, and start barking at something they can't see? I get up to try to make her feel better, but she won't come with me or listen to anything I say. It takes her a few minutes to calm down enough for me to pull her inside. Then I notice that these bright amber-colored eyes are watching us from 6 feet above the ground. The noise and howling start up again, but this time they are coming from my neighbor's backyard, which is behind my house. I decided to walk out there, and then they came from the other way. Again, one is behind my house, and I can hear it walking all over. Every time I try to find it, it's gone. It wasn't until later that night, too early in the morning, when I went back inside and heard another howl right outside my back door. When I looked out my kitchen window, this thing was at least 9 feet tall, had ears that stuck up like knife blades, shoulders as wide as a linebacker, and claws bigger than any animal or wolf I could have imagined. What happened next scared the crap out of me. This thing half stood down and took 2 huge steps. This thing was easy to move on its 2 legs. I remember everything happening slowly, the same way a person would. My dog just whimpers at the window until it gets up and leaves. Looks back, as if to say, "Come find me." I think this is why my dog no longer wants to go outside. He hasn't done anything else in the past 5 days except go to a party. He used to always go outside, but now he doesn't. In her own way, it seemed like what she saw was so hard for her to understand. Like, in a strange way, using body language instead of actual words. I should have taken a picture. I don't know what this thing might be or where it came from. But I think it came from the woods behind my house. Check out where my neighborhood is. A large section of national forest is right behind my house and those of my neighbors. I'm not sure for sure if it's a national forest, but I do know that the woods go back a long way and are pretty thick. In the fall, a lot of deer come out of those woods. So no one knows how far it goes back. I think that's where it came from, no matter what it is. It might have been hungry and looking for food not too long ago. I went hiking in one of the many parks around me. I brought my cousin along to have someone to talk to and keep me company. We're not too far apart. Have always been. Still, this is what happened. I'm not sure if I really believe her or not. After about 2 hours of hiking, we came across a pond. My cousin walked over to the edge by some trees and started talking quietly, so I couldn't hear what she was saying. I asked her at first, "What are you doing?" I walked up behind her and asked. As soon as she turned around, she grabbed my hand, looked down at the ground in front of us, and pointed at me to tell me to look. I could only see animal tracks in the soft mud, but she insisted it was something else. She said that normal animals couldn't have made the tracks because they were too big. Whoever or whatever made these tracks was at least 6 feet tall and very big. I didn't believe her, because when we watch scary movies or she reads something before bed, she really gets into character. I laughed and kind of rolled my eyes at her. We kept walking in silence for another 15 minutes before she finally spoke up. She said, "I'm not crazy, you know," with her eyes on the ground, as if she were talking to herself more than to me. I was shocked by what she said and forgot what we were talking about. Before that, we had 15 minutes. In answer, I turned around to face her. "So then show it. What did you see?" When I asked her about it, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I'm not lying." Then she started to run through the dense trees of the forest faster than I could keep up with. I think a branch must have caught on her foot or something. She stopped running, fell to the ground, and it looked like blood was all over her shoes where they had come off during the fall. I dropped my backpack next to hers, thinking she was hurt, and helped my cousin get back on her feet. We sat down for a few minutes to catch our breath before heading back home toward the park entrance closest to us. We didn't know for sure what it was or where it came from. We just thought it might be animal blood. So we cleaned it off and kept going. We sat down there for a few minutes to let her catch her breath before heading back home through the park entrance closest to us. When we finally got out of that part of the woods, we walked for another mile or so before she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. On top of a hill stood a large, dark figure. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but my cousin says that whatever it was not a person. She grabs my arm and pushes me behind some trees, so we can hide without being seen. We watched as this thing walked down the hill towards us and stopped about 20 feet away to smell the air. I'm sure it was almost 10 feet high. We crept even closer to the edge of the woods so that whatever it was couldn't hear or smell us. It took one step into the clearing, then another, and then it was completely gone. My cousin freaked out and told me to run home without her, but I made her come with me until we were almost back at the entrance. We both heard a loud crashing sound coming from the woods, which gave us the chills when we thought about it. I ran away back toward the clearing where I had last seen the thing before it disappeared. All I found were big footprints, just like my cousin said, so much bigger than mine. The ground was almost completely torn up, and there were big claw marks. Whatever this thing was, it must have been very angry. There was blood on the ground near some trees, and I could see a dead deer not too far away. It looked like whatever it was had grabbed the deer by its back legs and thrown it against a tree to hit its head in what I think was the blood we had found earlier the next day. My mom actually called a park ranger to tell him about what had happened. He didn't seem to take her very seriously, but he said he would write down what she said and make sure our safety was the most important thing. Still, it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. On my way to school, I walked to the swamps. This is when I saw something move past one of the trees. I stopped and stared at the spot where I had seen movement, and then something came out from behind the tree and took a step toward me. It looked like it was about 8 feet high. Long arms end in big hands with sharp claws at the end. It had a huge mouth full of sharp teeth, and its eyes were the color of blood. The creature kept looking at me and only looked away for a second. It took another step toward me, then turned and walked toward the river that was just beyond us. It then lifted its head and let out a screeching sound that I thought could be heard throughout the whole forest. I don't know how it happened, but when I woke up it was morning and I was in my bed at home. Either it was all a dream or it was the most real thing I've ever seen or done. The most real vision I've ever had. After what happened, I never went back into the swamps. But when my friends asked me about the swamp trip for the umpteenth time today, I told them what had happened in great detail. Way too clear and real to be a dream. They were wondering why we hadn't gone looking for whatever was making the noise. After telling them in detail what had happened, with the creature as the only exception, they decided to go look for themselves. When this happened, I was only 8 years old, and I never saw or heard from those friends again. I don't know if they died or just moved away, but I was told that they did. I know this is a short post, and I'm sorry about that, but I just felt like I needed to get this out there. On a camping trip, it got colder at night. My friends and I were walking around and playing flashlight tag. I turned around when I heard a sound to see what it was. Just then, a white creature that looked like a person walked right into my flashlight beam. Its head was down and its arms and legs were long. The head looked more like a cone and had no hair at all. Nothing like a Bigfoot at all. I ran back to where my friends and I were playing tag because I was so scared. I told them everything I had seen. They made fun of me, but they didn't hurt me. We all went to look for it together, but we didn't find it for the rest of the night. I was scared because I thought this thing was going to come back. It grabbed me and pulled me into the deep, dark woods. Friends kept trying to make me feel better. Nothing bad would happen, and everything would be fine. Well, I'm sleeping in my tent in the middle of the night, and so are my friends. That's when we hear a crackling sound that wakes us up. I could see that my friend's tent, which was next to mine, was moving. I couldn't see what was making the noise, but there was movement at the tent's opening. It looked like a big head with the same color eyes as the rest of its body. I climbed up to the entrance and turned on a light. When this thing turned, I saw it. It looked like something I had seen before, but it was a different animal. This thing had red eyes instead of the black ones I thought it had. Its face was also different from the white thing I had seen earlier. The face of this thing looked more like that of an ape, but it had sharp, serrated teeth like those of a shark. Like the other thing, it had long arms and hands with sharp, nasty nails on them. Its hair was kind of greasy, matted, and not well kept. Before running away, it hissed at me and scratched the ground. At this point, we were all about as sick as rocks, so we decided it was best to leave. We got up early, put everything in the cars, and left as soon as we could. After that night, I never went camping there again, and I made it a rule to stay away from woods at all costs. But the creature moved with the grace of an NBA player during a game of basketball. Since I've seen many things in this area, I've been finding out about more sightings. Some people know what dogmen are, but they call them dog squatch because it's easier to say or spell. It's possible that's what I saw, but I'm not sure. I did see something very scary, though. It's been a few years since then. Every night, I walk my dog near the river, where it's safe and there are lots of empty trails. Louisiana's Red River is a small county. You may have heard of it before. This one night, I kept hearing footsteps on my left, so I turned on my light and looked, but I couldn't see anything. So I keep going forward toward the river, which is about 50 yards away. The shuffling is getting closer and closer, and now it's right next to me on my right side. I'm starting to get scared. I think I'm going to be in trouble if this thing moves again. I know for sure that this is not a person because it looks too scary, but I also know that it could be either a Bigfoot or a dogman. I'm pretty sure I've met them before. I know how it feels when the mood changes around you. I have a tight grip on my dog because I'm afraid she'll try to attack whatever is following us. And that's when I first see it. It was about 7 feet tall and had white hair all over its body except for its chest, which was black. It looked like a fur coat wrapped around its waist, and it grunted in the dark. I've seen dogmen multiple times. As I've already said, the first time I saw them, I was 11 years old and there were about 5 or 6 of them running through the woods. At first, I thought they were just normal dogs. But the more I looked at them, the more evil they looked and the more different they were from any animal I had ever seen. Me and my dog ran. I bring up this story because this creature reminded me of something from it. It didn't look like a dogman, but I don't think it was one. What do you think about this? Okay, just letting you know. I'm sorry for how long this is going to be, but please hear me out. I've been meaning to tell you this story for a long time. It happened at a campground in East Tennessee a little over a year ago. It was just one of those times when you go camping with friends and nothing much happens. One morning, my friend and I were sitting around the campfire drinking coffee and talking about what we had seen. He told me about his encounter with the thing. He said that one morning, as he was getting ready for breakfast, he heard something quiet moving around on the other side of his motorhome. By the time he got there, the noises had stopped. He was also on his own property, so he didn't have to worry. But he said he felt like he was being watched all the time. So I told him about a couple of things that happened to me while I was camping there with different girls I had dated in the past. The first one was when we were passing the time by singing and talking while sitting around the fire at night. We both got up at some point and went into the motorhome to get something. When we went back outside, I saw that all of our lanterns had been turned off without us knowing. That wasn't too scary, but what really freaked me out was that they didn't get turned back on for a few hours, even though nobody had touched them. I went back outside after I saw that they were off, and when I came back they were all on. Again, there was a night when we all sat around the fire. My friend and his girlfriend weren't there this time. I was with a different group of friends, including a couple who had never been to this campsite before. 5 of us had been there for about an hour when one of the girls heard her name being called. Over in the forest. She asked if her name had been called. We told her that we didn't know who or what it could have been, so we told her no. And none of our voices were ones that she knew. She said it was a man's voice, and that it was very deep. I have another story from about 2 years ago in Kentucky. It's a real thing that happened to my friend, and it's different from everything else. In this one, there are actual witnesses who can back up what happened. 4 friends and I were camping by a stream near La Blash Creek off of US 150 East around midnight. When we saw lights come on. Some kind of exiting the highway. At first, we thought it could have been a slow-moving car coming down the road. After all, it was after midnight, and nobody goes down there after midnight unless they're lost. As it got closer, they watched it until it turned right and went into the woods. which was about 400 feet from where they were sitting by their tents, making them want to know more. "Let's go see what's going on," they said. And they both went, leaving the other two to guard the fort. As my friend got closer to the place where he'd seen the lights go out, near a tree, he saw what looked like two big dogs standing on their back legs. He thinks he asked something like, "What are you?" He just said. Two people were standing there and looking at him. He says they're about 4 to 5 feet tall and they had really long tails and they were grey with very pointed, elongated features. Their faces looked really scary. This is one of those stories that for me to this day, I'm not sure if there's any real explaining it or what it really could have been. I mean, there are a lot of things, but the lights that are coming off the road and almost floating or levitating into the forest are the most interesting. That was strange. It was almost like a UFO, if you get what I mean, and there were two small dogs, or goblins that looked like dogs, as my friend calls them. That's what really freaked him out. Why did they show up? And why were they talking about the lights? Could those things we saw have been aliens? Please tell me if anyone knows anything about this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story or anything else you might have to say or suggest.